So, you may have noticed that Bob ceded 5 minutes of his time to me. As soon as he said that I've already spoken and I only have a few minutes to say, I've extended my talk. We have very little time and a lot of data. So what I'm going to do is to outline I didn't use my time to thank people, particularly the American Prospect, for which and the Campaign for America's Future, but I should mention for the American Prospect, I've been working on a book on leadership, which has taken me writing about the various people that are mentioned in the bio piece. But there's an American Prospect article which keeps coming up in each of the chapters, so they keep going back to American Prospect articles, so that this book is turning out to be simply pimping for the American Prospect, which I'm always happy to do. This conference is about the failure of conservatism. I can confirm that it has failed, and so therefore you did not waste this entire day. I'm not sure why they didn't have this panel at the beginning. So my main summary point is that, well, first starting on the Republican side, and I will introduce some data and dwell on a few slides to underscore each point. The scale of the shift on partisanship is daunting. It's going to make everybody look good as they figure out strategies for winning. But there's been and it's going to probably Kansas is going to come into play. But it's the scale of change that we're talking about is you stare at it because it keeps playing itself at every level. Whether it's a poll today which asks which candidates people are paying attention to, and it turns out Republicans are paying more attention to the Democratic candidates than they are to their own candidates. The entire country has shifted at every level, and that's going to be reflected here in the data. Conservatism itself is bankrupt. The data supports it overall in terms of the way people are reacting to the term, but also on every philosophic point that one wants to pull out about conservatism. You have a trend against or a crash of support on conservative principles. It's hard. I could stop there because we're here with this examining the proposition of their failure and the loss of the country, and for sure that's true. What's more interesting is where we go from there, and what the poll will show with a range of polls. I'm looking at the polling that we've done for Democracy Corps. I'm looking at the polling that we've done for NPR, but I've also used the Pew data as well, all of which come to the same point, that the country is looking for bold solutions along a whole range of areas, which I'll outline. And I will actually spend more of my time on this, there is a perversity in the way they have failed, which was hinted at by Bob. They have failed in ways that has undermined our sense of collective capacity. They have proved incompetent and communicated that government is incompetent. They have raised issues of cost and waste in the efficacy of government. They have, in a period of stagnant incomes and financial pressures on people that we want to talk about in economic terms, in fact, have consequences for spending and taxes and people's wanting their money to be well spent and respected, their tax dollars to be respected. That has combined that with corruption and greed and special interests. There is very little reason to believe people should turn to government. We think they should get past all this, but I'm not sure why people should get past all this. In 1992, when we were trying to fashion Clinton's campaign for the presidency, and it's not, and in some ways there's a lot of similarities to the period we're in now, to the way Clinton was running, where the economy was, and then making that the economic issues, wanting investment to be the central message. But we ended up with what was called the Reich-Osborne solution to how it is we got people to listen to us, which is people were so skeptical, and many people were turning to Ross Perot. Ross Perot was ahead in the polls for most of the period leading into the Democratic convention, and we were in third place when we were trying to figure out our message. We could not get heard on investment unless people first heard that we got it, that government had failed. Unless we began with a critique of government, we could not get heard on investment. People needed people needed to hear that we understood the value of tax dollars, the corruption of government, the waste of government, and that was a precondition. Now I know Bob and I actually we don't disagree on the budget, on the deficits question with respect to the economy and what one needs at a given time, at this moment in particular. But the deficit is part of the overall sense. These people have made such a mess of things that how you establish the credibility again in order to deal with governmental issues that need to be addressed by government is a major, major challenge facing progressives. And so that the bottom line of my presentation is this a progressive moment? We know the conservatives lost it. Is it a progressive moment? I don't know. It may be Perot's moment. I'm not sure what remember we're gonna have a year more of gridlock going into this election, and there's already some evidence of pullback from the Congress in reaction to this. For sure, they're with what Congress is doing on Iraq, but the country's not into gridlock. The country has real life problems. They want to see things addressed, and it's part of the overall narrative that takes people into more fragmented independent politics, anti-politics politics, which is very much part of this moment, not just progressive moment. Let me just illustrate these points with some slides, and then you can just stop me when you think I've exhausted my welcome. Just on where the parties are as a starting point. This is the Pew has tracked their party, the party ID advantage of the Democrats, and just taking that back into the mid-1980s. And we're looking at, a scale of advantage on party identification that now most of our polls is moving toward 9 percentage points. And so it's a starting. This is not a fair game at the moment when you talk about any kind of electoral situation. But let me look more important than that. Is a question that's not party identification, which is what this slide is entitled. This is a thermometer score University of Michigan developed, which asks on a 0 to 100 scale whether you have a warm or favorable feeling about each party, which they ask each party. 100 being warm and favorable, 0 being cold, 50 being a midpoint. So when it's 50, it's about half giving a warm response, half giving a cold response. Okay. If you look at this from the early 1960s, which is when they started tracking using this question, what you see is, first of all, is a long story of the parties in decline and less and less in regard for both parties as they work their way down together toward public contempt. What you look at when you get to the most recent period is you see the Democrats kind of pulling up a little bit. So our advantage, what you're seeing right now in the current period, is a function of Democrats kind of pulling up to about the 50 point, while the Republicans crash past us. They feel like it raced past us to the bottom. But what we've got are two parties, both of which are, compared historically, are viewed with little positive sentiment, and there is skepticism about both parties. And so when we ask a question on whether we, for example, pose the question, I'm going to use my book because I can't, whether the next president should be someone who sticks to his core principles and fights for what they believe in is right, versus someone who compromises and produces bipartisan compromise. Overwhelmingly, people want bipartisan compromise. What they're looking at is two parties that fight each other, do nothing, and people want to transcend this. I describe that because I believe it offers the possibility of third-party candidates looking at this moment and not so much seeing a progressive moment, but as an anti-politics, an anti-party moment, which could be reinforced by what we see over the next year. On conservatism itself, that same thermometer score we talked about, we looked at with the word conservative and the word liberal, not compared to each other. In 1994, we asked this question after the landslide elections in '94, and what you saw was there were 47% who gave a warm, favorable response to the word conservative. You should note that liberals have not done very well at any point, and there's no one speaking for liberals, and so liberals have not moved up. But what we do see, and we've just asked this in a poll that we finished a week ago, is that the percentage giving a warm response to conservatives is 37%, so it is ineffective, which is what it was last year. So that there's been a 10-point drop in people responding favorably to the term conservative. This isn't whether you identify with it, just whether you have a favorable reaction to the term. And if you look at the content of this, and you can look at this on almost any set of principles. Oops. With Pew, they asked a question, whether government should care for those who can't care for themselves. That number, which dropped down, in mid-1994 down to 57%, has now moved up 12 points up until to 2007, where you have 2/3 saying the government should be caring for people. I'm just giving these as examples of conservative principles and how the public has moved against them. Government should take care of people who can't take care of themselves. We've seen a surge of that up to 69% from 51% at the beginning of the Bush presidency. So while this period of conservative governance, we're watching their principles falling away with the country. On various social conservative questions, this has to do with whether Pew asked, school boards should have the right to fire homosexual teachers. 1990, the beginning of the Clinton presidency, half of the people thought they should have that right. It actually drops continuously, but you see it dropped in 1994, but it's dropped in the most recent poll down to only 28%. That is, radically below. So on social conservative questions related to tolerance, social conservative principles dropping. Along with the opposition to the Iraq War, and I won't present the data on the Iraq War, but we've asked a question over time, which at various times has been close, which is the question, which is, how is it that we make our country secure? Security depends on building strong ties with other nations, or bottom line, America's security depends on our military strength, which is the red line. What you see is, as the Iraq War became unpopular, that red line number has moved down. First, 2/3 say the country's on the wrong track, so you have a change electorate. There's nothing that's happened in the recent period that's moved people away from that judgment. And so when we ask people to choose whether the country faces big problems or whether the country faces manageable problems that need some change, you see the percentages, the 54%, more importantly, the 49% who strongly say we face big problems. And when we ask people whether you want more or less government in a range of areas, what you see is area after area, starting with national security and energy, where people want more government, not less. I'm going to just go very quickly through this. We look at global warming, in which you see 2/3 supporting action on global warming here, that global warming is a serious problem that this country needs to tackle, even if it will cost businesses more to meet stronger regulations on pollution. So it's cost, regulation, and the opposite position is global warming is a problem, but we should not put more regulation on business that will cost us jobs and increase prices for consumers. Okay, it's 2-to-1 in favor of acting on global warming. I'm going to just highlight health care. This is whether we should go for universal health care or whether we have big health care problems like children and not having insurance and high cost of prescription drugs. 2-to-1 people opt for universal over dealing with elements of the problem. Now, just give you a sense of where people are in terms of what they want, and I have to credit James Carville with this. He says, let's see how far they'll go. Let's just tell them we're going to do a Canadian healthcare system and have a government takeover of the healthcare system. What do we think of that? 52% favor that. If you look at the wording of the question, now's the time to establish a Canadian-style national healthcare system that provides affordable healthcare for all Americans, or we can improve our healthcare system through incremental change steps without radical measures that will result in a government takeover. Okay? Only 44% choose that. If you look at the Democratic primary electorate on the left side, that same question, is 70-27 in favor of a Canadian healthcare type model. Now, I'm not saying there aren't other models that people have, but just get a sense of people's openness to addressing these problems. All right. Now the problem, which is government. Here we're looking at, this is Pew asking simply whether as Americans, we can always find a way to solve our problems. The blue and yellow line are Democrats and independents, which have been dropping down during this period of the Bush presidency. And we ask whether you have a positive or negative view of various levels of government. What you see is state government gets fairly high marks, but federal government very low. And when we simply ask the question just about government in concept, government does more to help people get ahead in life, or government makes it harder for people to get ahead in life, 57-29 harder. Now, obviously we can change it, but the fact of the matter is they are living with this government, which they view makes it harder for them rather than easier. I'm sure a lot of it has to do with taxes and not addressing issues that could impact their lives, but that is the inheritance, of this period. Whether elected officials care about what they think, we see a decline in that, significant decline in the blue line, and people thinking elected officials care about them. And then we ask, when something is run by government, it's usually inefficient and wasteful. You see a growth of that number under the Republicans, who supposedly are more efficient and not as insensitive to waste. This is a survey Democracy Corps did on government accountability. And these results, I find, I look at these results and I pause and I say, if we have a progressive narrative, we've got to start here on figuring out how we reform government, because we're not going to get to the things they want to do unless we get there. So, for example, when we ask the question, imagine that the federal government or the state government received additional money. You think the additional money is more likely to be spent well, or is it more likely to be wasted? Now, with state government, you get 40% saying that they'll spend it well, but you get only 13% who think the federal government would spend that additional money well. Now, just in concept, we says, okay, because I believe what's at the heart of this is the fact that, and it's another part of the perversity. One part of the perversity is that they've corrupted the government, made it incompetent and inefficient. The other part of it is they've also helped produce the stagnant incomes, which haven't gone up in a decade. And so that people are financially pressed and therefore worried about taxes and other costs. So when we say with people financially pressed, we need representatives in Congress who will work to cut health care and energy costs. That sounds right. I have to promise you, I thought that was going to win this choice. Or with people financially pressed, we need representatives in Congress who will support less taxes and less government spending. Okay, that won. That's a month ago. That won on that choice. So as we think about how we turn this into a progressive period, we have to understand how people have come out of the last decade, both in their own personal economy and in what their views of what government does. They want accountability first, and I think I'll stop with this. Actually, one more slide. I want Congress to first invest in areas like healthcare, education, and energy, even if it means spending additional money. Or I want Congress to first focus on cutting wasteful spending and making government more accountable. More accountable government wins over these popular things which we offered them, healthcare, energy, things we know they're for. We know they want government to do more in these areas, but it's trumped by accountability because they think they're wasting the money. Now, this title should have said, progressive narrative wins. In one of our Democracy Corps polls, we tried to test an overall conservative narrative for this coming election, for the presidential election, compared to a progressive narrative, and this one centered on the middle class. And if you look at it, I think the conservative narrative, and since this conference is about conservatism in retreat, the conservative narrative is Republican candidate says we need to get back to basic values, make our country strong, cutting taxes so individuals, families, businesses can prosper and our economy can grow. There's no substitute for families that teach right and wrong. I will address the healthcare and education by giving more choice and trusting people. And I'll never forget my first responsibility, a strong military keeping America secure from the terrorists. I think it is a strong conservative statement. But it loses by 20 points to a democratic middle-class message. So we are in a period where the plates have shifted toward the Democrats. We're in a period where the conservative principles are being abandoned, where people want to see a collective response. They're open to our overall narrative. They simply don't trust the instrument that we are offering to get the job done, and it's no small amendment. It's a big piece of getting this to be a progressive period, not a Perot period. Thank you.